Ritual is something that we mostly associate with religious practices, certain superstitions. But in fact, if you pay attention, rituals are everywhere in almost every aspect of our lives, both social and personal, and in fact, professional as well. And it's quite interesting to study it scientifically. As I often do it, I talk about certain ideas from Oxford Publications series called A Very Short Introduction. I'm going to be reading certain pages from the book called Ritual, written by Barry Stephenson. So let's just try to understand what ritual really is, because it's like language, symbolism, music. It's very much a core of what we call being human, being a part of civilized society. It is something that we cannot avoid. In fact, so many rituals, they pretty much define who we are, of our living experience, our identities, and yet we understand very little of it, and rarely do we talk about it. So let's talk about it, and now I'm going to read the pages from this book. Let's start. The concept of ritualization is one of the cornerstones of ritual studies, though the term has different meanings and uses. The first scholars to systematically develop the notion were ethologists, students of animal behavior. So this is where we'll begin our inquiry. Ritual is often associated with religion and therefore with the sacred, with matters heavenly, transcendent, and of ultimate importance. It may seem odd then to begin with a discussion of animal behavior and an ethological perspective on ritual. Culturally speaking, there has been a tendency to identify ritual as among those activities and capacities, language, reason, the use of symbols and tools that distinguishes and separates human from other animals. The work in ethology on animal ritualization, however, suggests that ritual is also what connects us to our biological kinfolk. The work of Charles Darwin is representative of a sea change in the kinds of methods employed to study animals. In 19th century Britain, there arose a novel idea. Rather than focus on refining systems of classification based on detailed anatomical study of dead animals, it would be better to exchange the morgue-like setting of zoological laboratories and study the behavior of living animals in their natural habitats. The amateur ornithologists who took to the forests and fields of rural Britain at the turn of the 20th century to patiently observe birds ushered in new approaches and attitudes in the biological sciences, creating a new kind of job description and specialization, that of the naturalist. The early naturalists laid the groundwork for the emergence of the academic field of ethology, the study of animal behavior. Pursuing close, detailed observations of animals, naturalists and ethologists were struck by certain kind of behaviors that seemed to them ritual-like in character. In the effort to generate rich descriptions of the bird and animal behaviors they were observing, naturalists had recourse to tropes and languages drawn from the world of human culture, especially the domains of ritual, theatre, play, and games. The study of ritual from an ethological perspective has built into it a kind of circularity. The detailed study of animal behavior of their ceremonies can tell us something about human ritual, we assume. But it is human ritual that allowed ethologists to perceive animal behavior in ritual terms in the first place. Frederick Kirkman makes this point when he reports how, on one particular day, after several months of observing black headed gulls and terns, he suddenly was able to see the birds gesturing and posturing. Ritual is not only something that people and animals engage in, it is also a way of regarding things. Ritual is both action and idea, and this fact can make it a slippery fish. On one hand, in order to think critically and analytically about ritual, we need to keep these two dimensions distinct. Ritual as a category is not the same thing as ritual enactment, and a great deal of grey matter has been sacrificed on the altar of definitional and conceptual clarity, with some scholars going so far as to claim that the idea or category of ritual is entirely a scholarly construct, loaded with Western assumptions and biases, and not at all descriptive of real phenomenon. This is not quite my view of the matter. On the other hand, the category or idea of ritual shapes the kinds of behaviors and actions we identify as ritual. What then did ethologists such as Kirkman suddenly see in the behavior of birds that led them to think and frame their observations in the language of ritual? In short, their attention was drawn to conspicuous behavior, conspicuous by virtue of being patterned, stylized, repetitive, and surprisingly communicative. Honeybees perform an intricate series of abdominal waggles and footwork upon returning to the hive from food gathering. A bee will shuffle around in the shape of a figure 8 while also moving their abdomen up and down. Other bees gather to observe the performance. When we watch bees do this, we say the bees are dancing. As the zoologist Max von Frisch did. In 1946, he proposed the idea that these complex and apparently random movements were in fact a means of communication, with the distance and direction to a profitable flower patch signaled by the angle and duration of the waggling. For several decades, the notion was controversial, not the least reason for which is that the power of language had for centuries made communication the provenance of human beings, singular evidence of a distinct ontological difference between human and animal. Sophisticated tests employing radar have indeed confirmed, however, that bees through movement are communicating directions to food supplies, just as Frisch had originally argued. Current research further suggests that the waggle dance also communicates information about predation risk. Exactly how this all works is not fully understood, but that the waggle dance is an act of communication is now widely accepted in the scientific community. Ritual, in turn, has been widely theorized as communicative action with gestures, acts, and utterances, a chiefly non-linguistic means of sending messages. Ritual as a form of discourse. This means that ritual, like verbal communication, requires interpretation, and like the spoken word, is subject to ambiguities, misunderstandings, and deceptions. Moreover, as with linguistic forms of communication, it is not easy to say precisely how ritual works. Now, let's talk about ritualization theory. Ritualization theory attempts to explain the presence and development of conspicuous anatomical features and behavioral repertoires in animals. Ethologists ask two key questions. How did these behaviors come to be? What are these behaviors for? In a nutshell, ethology postulates that ritualization is a selective process that allows for the enhanced communication of evolutionary advantageous information and emotional states. The notion of ritualization in ethology proposes a process through which animals' rituals develop. An originally instrumental behavior changes its function to become a communicative behavior. This new behavior becomes independent of its original motivation and derives from motivations associated with communicating emotional states. These movements become increasingly exaggerated, rhythmic, stylized, and stereotypical, which decreases the ambiguity of the behavior as a signaling mechanism. In addition to stylized movements, conspicuous body parts and coloring evolve, which makes the behavior an even more effective means of communication. In ethology, ritualized behavior is functional. It improves communication in potentially troublesome situations associated with mating, feeding, controlling territory, and establishing social hierarchies and bonds. Ritualization theory is based on conflict models of inner emotional states. Animal ceremonies evolve, so the reasoning goes, in response to having to manage emotional discord created by ambivalence inherent in the conflict created by two or more behavioral tendencies that may lead to trouble. Sexual attraction, for example, draws pair close together, but proximity also produces fear and the desire to flee on one hand and hostility and aggression on the other. A balanced attitude from the extremes of flight or fight is required for successful mating, and the ritualization of appeasing gestures and displays is the route to establishing such attitudes. Ethologists and biologists understand ritualization as a remarkably flexible evolutionary process, which builds upon convenient behavior patterns and morphological structures in such a way as to enhance communication, create social bonds and hierarchies, appease aggression, establish territory, share food, regulate mating, and reduce intra-group hostilities among individuals. In calling these behavior patterns ritualizations, ethologists are drawing on certain features of the rites of human beings that human beings perform, in particular the stylized, repetitive, performative, and stereotyped nature of many rites and ceremonies.